sometimes it's so difficult to process the suffering of this life. And Peter writes in First Peter chapter 4, he says, "Therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourself also with the same purpose." And he says, "Because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin." Now, there's kind of a perspective in this. We think about Jesus dying on the cross, and Jesus suffered to the point of death on a cruel cross. And in that moment, it would have appeared that everything was out of control, uh, that Jesus was uh, defeated, and that this world had, man, just Satan had won, right? But in the midst, as we look back, we know that the cross is declaring victory, right? That Jesus dies in our place, that through the resurrection, right, we see that victory displayed. And in the midst of our present suffering, it may feel like maybe somebody's walking through difficult times, and it may feel like everything is out of control. And there are so many things about suffering and we just don't understand, and things that why this happens, and why a person goes through something. My wife and I were talking last night just about situation in our family, and about Sherry's dad. And there was this thought of, he had his first wife had passed away from cancer, and then he remarries, and just is enjoying life, and then his second wife dies of cancer. And there are things about suffering and about this world that we just really can't get our minds around. But instead of turning to sin and coping with those kind of things, and alcohol or drugs or all those kind of things, there's a hope that is beyond this life that we are living in. And it says that we live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. And he goes on in verse 5, and he says they will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. He reminds us of eternity, right? We see through the cross, we know, and that what looked like the Lord was out of control, like the things were spinning out of control, we see that he was sovereign and in control. And through the resurrection, there's hope, and we live for that hope. And it says the gospel's for this purpose been preached to even those who are dead, though they are judged in the flesh as men, that they may live in the spirit according to the will of God. The end of all things is near. So there's this picture of a judgment coming. And it says the gospel's been preached to those that have already died, right? And even though they've died physically, it says that they may live in the spirit according to the will of God, that death is not the end, that judgment is coming. He says the end of all things is near. Therefore be of sound judgment, be of sober spirit, keep fervent in your love for one another. He says in the midst of these times, as the end approaches, we recognize there's suffering, there's difficulty, there's things that we walk through, but we're to keep fervent in our love for one another. Jesus said that it's by this that the world will know that we're his disciples, by the love that we have for one another. And it says love covers a multitude of sins. We see, man, how our love for one another, our willingness to walk alongside each other, what an incredible way. It says be hospitable to one another without complaint. Every one of you has a special gift. It says as each one has this special gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the grace of God. God has given us grace and mercy. And he goes on, and just, man, incredible passages. He says, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you, at the trials that you're walking through. Verse 12. And he says, it comes upon you for testing as though some strange thing was happening to you. But to the degree that you share in the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation. For if you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed. And these are words that sound so strange. It's not the prosperity gospel that you might see. The Joy Boys are saying, hey, you know what? You never go through any hard times if you follow Jesus. But that's not what the scriptures say. That's not what they say. He says, if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in this name. For it is time for judgment to begin with the house of God. If it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel? If it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved. What will is the will become of the godless man and the sinner? Therefore, those who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. And when we think about the things that people face in this life, the suffering that people go through, and there's so much of that and it just hurts our hearts to see, and we look to the resurrection. We look with hope beyond these moments, right? That death is not the end for us. It seems so final, but from the perspective of heaven, it is the beginning. Death is not the end. It is the beginning. We think of the separation that we face here, and it seems like it is separation. It is. But from a heavenly perspective, it is reunion. It is rejoicing. And we walk through difficult times, but as we do, we stay fervent in our love for one another. We walk with one another. We embrace just the reality that we live in this broken world, but we know that Jesus is coming, that there's a time when all things will be made new, and we entrust our souls to a faithful Creator. We know that God is working even when we can't see it, and we're not promised a life that's free from pain, a life that's free from suffering, but we know that He is with us, and that there's eternity that is coming. There's an abundant hope that we have in Christ. And I want to encourage you, if you're suffering, if you're walking through just the difficult things that this life can bring, that we might keep our eyes fixed on the hope that we have in Christ, that we would be patient as we wait for the Lord's return, trusting in Him, knowing that He is working and that He loves us. God bless you. I hope you have